Hey, everybody. Welcome back to CANswers, the podcast about the modern cancer journey. And it comes from my perspective. I have been diagnosed with cancer since 2005, have had over a dozen surgeries, have been through chemo, have been through radiation, and actually have a tumor on my neck right now, about to go get a pre-surgery examination soon to see what we're going to do about that. There's no particular plan at the moment. But that's the problem with cancer is very rarely do you get answers. And that's why we started the podcast. We want to talk about where are the answers that we can find, that we can lock down, because more of us are getting environmental cancer than ever. And this is a huge, huge concern. And it should be for everybody. I put this graphic up all the time, but I want to remind everybody that 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime now. That is a huge shift. What is happening? Well, I was reading recently that around 80% or so, give or take, maybe 5 or 6% of new cancers are environmental cancers. Now, they just put out a new report saying that it's lifestyle choice. They say that kids are getting more cancer under 50. Why is that? Well, they're saying, oh, it's got to be the risks. Kids are taking risks. They're smoking, they're whatever. Well, when you look at the actual graph, smoking is down. A lot of other things are down. But what is environmental and also a lifestyle choice that people do not consider is where you live. And this is what we talk about, environmental cancer. We talk about environmental justice because Cancer Alley is a story that follows that heavily. And it's a great example of how everything works on paper and nothing works in reality. So I just wanted to go over a little bit today. Who is responsible for this mess? We all know that our environments are being filled with cancer-causing pollutants. Everybody knows that, from water advisories to fish advisories. It's a very common thing, not a big surprise at all. So just imagine now, there are multiple levels of who is controlled. And we're just going to take Cancer Alley for the example today. So for Cancer Alley, for example, it starts with the EPA. It starts with the Clean Air Act. Okay, it starts up there, and there are certain levels that are set by the Clean Air Act. Now, when the Clean Air Act has been violated, say by a company like Denka, then the EPA steps in. Now, the EPA has multiple regions. And crazy enough, we learned while we were making phosphate that the EPA is not in Florida. EPA was run out of town by Florida years ago. It's very sad. The closest office is in Georgia. But this, again, is back to Louisiana. I believe the closest EPA office there is in Texas. So you've got the EPA standards, and if they're not met, which has to be proven by somebody. A lot of these companies are self-regulated. They submit their own reports, and a lot of them have been emitting levels way beyond the levels they're supposed to. And then, okay, so this is happening. Denka is another great example. There is a order for chloroprene of 0.2, I believe it's micrograms per meter cubed, squared. Gonna have to check that. Squared, meter squared. Anyway, we'll check that. So the problem is it is not an EPA standard. It is an EPA suggestion, which does not mean you have to hit the legal mark. So out of 0.2, this elementary school that we saw in Cancer Alley, next to Denka, this Fifth Ward Elementary School is receiving numbers closer to 10 and 12 as opposed to 0.2. So I'm not great at math, but I know that's a terrible number for them to be hitting. They are failing at every level. So what happens? Well, quite simply, we're going to get to the next level of corruption that goes down to the county commissioners. But what happens next is a series of monitoring. So where we went, again, there were monitors around Denka, because they emit so much chloroprene, which is known to cause cancer, and they're known to be emitting at crazy levels. Instead of 0.2, they're emitting levels like 12. So there we saw EPA continuous monitoring, and DENCA has a temporary monitoring. So the difference is EPA monitoring is collecting information over a 24-hour period, dropping it in, and containing all that information. The one by DENCA is if a certain set of information is triggered within that device, then it goes off and takes a sample for about 10 hours and then stops. So it's a big difference between a continuous monitoring station and the more temporary ones that DENCA has put up around their fence line because the EPA mandated it. So what do you end up with? You end up with a bunch of monitoring, which tells everybody what they knew before they started the monitoring, which is DENCA is emitting at way high levels that are cancer causing. Now, why is DENCA not responsible? Now we're going to get down to the lower layer of politics that every activist is familiar with, which is your county commission. Because it has to be multiple levels. So if the EPA is like, yeah, we don't know, we're not sure, watch this. And the facility's like, hey, man, we're doing our best. Then you have to go down to your local place. Now, a place like Cancer Alley, you have to remember that a lot of the sheriff's office, the political offices are funded by the money that comes in by oil and gas from these companies, and these companies pay all the small towns. So it is a livelihood for many of these small towns, although the sales rates for a lot of these places are 8 to 10%. Just imagine you live in a very small area, right? In like the middle of the bayou, and you're paying 10% sales tax. That, my friends, that's what we pay in LA. That's California, 10.25%, I believe. So crazy when you compare that. So anyway, the burden of the tax is on the residents, which is a big problem. And we see this everywhere. But the big problem here is that so now it has to pass. What it has to do is it has to go out to the city council or the county commissioner or whatever, and they're going to talk about it. And all of the residents are allowed to come in and make comments. So everybody comes in, they make their comments. They say what the problem is. Our friend Stell Bailey is amazing at this. She goes out. She's always at the meetings. She is always out there getting her voice heard, and it has led to actual legislative change. So just remember, it starts here. Here's where you can go meet your local politicians, and it works its way up from there. So they don't always know. They're not always conscious. I'm not defending them in any way. They should be conscious. But if they're not, make sure they are. Make sure they know about the problems in your area. And you go to county commissioner or your city council meetings, and you can have your voice heard. Every resident has to be able to be heard on the record. Now, places like we saw in Florida, Mosaic has them do these really crazy workarounds. So sometimes they'll block the meetings. Sometimes they'll block activists out of it. They'll block them out. You're not allowed in. The activists are not allowed in. Sometimes they'll say, listen, due to time constraints, trust me, they loved it during COVID. Due to time constraints, we're going to allow you to send a voice message for 2 minutes and tell us what you think. Now, regardless of if 95% of the comments and many of these city council meetings and county commissioner meetings go like this, where the residents are against something, the people on the board still vote in interest of industry. So this is, it's designed to fail, and it always fails by design. This is our big problem we have. This is why we have so many new environmental cancers. Who is responsible? The companies, as much as we want to blame them, are doing what they are allowed to do and what they can get away with and what they, how do you say it? They lobby to do. They lobby for these types of changes. So remember, there's multiple levels. You can talk to the EPA. It's not going to be very effective. You can go to your local legislation. There you will find other activists that share in your passion, because if you show up, that's half the way of being an activist, is just being there, showing up. Have your voice heard. Don't be afraid, and don't forget, it goes on the permanent record. So maybe they don't listen now, but it doesn't matter because it is there forever when it comes to this topic. And that's what's important. Having your voice heard, having your voice preserved, and having your voice actually taken into account. So I just wanted to first thank all the amazing activists that are out there doing this all the time, going to meetings, making sure to keep their local politicians at task. Remember, they are the ones that are going to vote on the permits, and those permits are going to bring potentially pollutants into your neighborhood. So you need to find out what it means for your health and your neighborhood's health before you allow them to bring that in. And if you hear that there's a meeting coming up or a permit meeting, it's all about the permit meetings. Go to the permit meetings, make a big fuss, stop the permits. Make your voice heard. The only way to keep them out is with permits. You can do it. We've seen small towns like in DeSoto, we're able to stop industry from coming in. You can do it too. It can be done, and we see it being done more and more and more throughout the country, which is great because environmental cancers are on the rise. This is the only way to prevent them from coming into your town, your neighborhood, and your family. So anyway, I would love to hear what kind of industries are around your area, or if you're aware of any industry type of problems going on. Excuse me. Get a lot of pollen. Very allergic to pollen. It can make travel difficult as well. Anyway, let me know what sort of industry is around where you live, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about the health of the nature, health of your neighbors, and as always, the health of your family and yourself. I hope everybody's being safe, taking care, and always look forward to having these cancer conversations. Please join us tomorrow. We're going to continue talking about so many different aspects that involve cancer. Tomorrow, we discuss family. So thank you, everybody, for joining today, and I look forward to catching up tomorrow. Have a great day.